The last time Prince performed live, he was already dying. April 14th, 2016, Atlanta's Fox Theater. A late-night show scheduled for 10 p.m., delayed by a week because of what everyone believed was just the flu. But the truth was far darker. While thousands of fans celebrated the intimate piano and a microphone performance, Prince's body was shutting down. The prescription pills hidden in mislabeled bottles, the chronic pain that had tortured him for decades, the secret addiction that not even his closest circle fully understood. All of it converged on that Atlanta stage under those iconic purple lights. 24 hours after his final bow, Prince would collapse at 45,000 feet, requiring an emergency landing and a life-saving dose of Narcan. 168 hours later, he would be found dead in a Paisley Park elevator. But on April 14th, nobody knew. Nobody saw. This is what really happened during the final performance of the world's greatest musical genius. Before we dive deeper into this story, if you want to hear more untold stories about music legends and the moments that changed history forever, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what's coming next. April 7th, 2016 should have been the night. Tickets had been sold weeks in advance for Prince's piano and a microphone tour stop at Atlanta's Fox Theater, one of the most intimate performance series of his entire career. The concept was brilliantly simple, stripping away the elaborate stage productions, the backup bands, the visual spectacle that had defined decades of Prince's performances. Just him, a piano, and occasionally a microphone. Raw talent. Pure genius. Nothing to hide behind. It was the kind of artistic statement that only someone with absolute confidence in their craft could make. And Prince had been making that statement in cities across America, leaving audiences speechless with performances that reminded everyone why his name belonged in conversations about Mozart, Hendrix, and every virtuoso who had ever touched an instrument. But on April 6th, the announcement came. The show was postponed due to the flu. Fans were disappointed but understanding. It was just the flu. Prince was human after all. The show would be rescheduled for April 14th, just 1 week later. Everyone would get their refunds or could keep their tickets for the new date. Nobody questioned it. Nobody thought twice. The flu was going around that spring. It made perfect sense. Except it wasn't the flu. What was happening inside Prince's body was far more catastrophic. Decades of physical performance had destroyed his hips. The 2010 surgery hadn't helped. The chronic pain led to prescription pills, then stronger doses, then mislabeled bottles from questionable sources. The flu that postponed April 7th was actually Prince's body beginning to rebel against years of secret addiction. Between April 7th and April 14th, something happened at Paisley Park that very few people witnessed. Prince wasn't resting. He wasn't recovering from the flu like a normal person would. He was in the studio, working obsessively, the way he always had. Sleep was a luxury Prince had never indulged in much. 4 hours a night was standard throughout his career. And even now, with his body failing, the creative drive pushed him forward. People who saw him that week described a man who seemed both energized and exhausted. He talked about future tours and upcoming projects. But there were brief flashes where something else showed through. A wince of pain, quickly hidden. A shakiness in his hands that wasn't there before. His team prepared for the Atlanta show with the efficiency that came from decades of touring. Equipment was loaded, travel arrangements were confirmed. The set list was discussed, though with Prince, you never really knew what would happen once he sat at that piano. The man was jazz in human form, capable of spontaneous brilliance that no amount of planning could predict or contain. On April 13th, Prince and his small traveling party flew to Atlanta. The Fox Theater, a stunning 1920s movie palace with ornate Egyptian and Moorish architectural details, was the perfect venue for the intimate performance style of the piano and a microphone tour. Just under 5,000 seats, every person in the audience would feel close to the stage, would see every expression on Prince's face, would hear every nuance of his playing. It was the kind of venue where genius couldn't hide, but also where genius could shine without distraction. Prince checked into his hotel and, according to those who were with him, seemed in good spirits. Tired, perhaps, but excited about the show. He always came alive before performances. The stage was where everything made sense, where the pain receded, where he became something more than human. Just a few more hours until showtime. April 14th, 2016, 10 p.m. The house lights at the Fox Theater dimmed, and a roar erupted from the crowd. Nearly 5,000 people who had waited through the postponement, who had held on to their tickets with the kind of devotion only Prince could inspire, rose to their feet as a single spotlight illuminated the stage. And there he was, purple suit, perfectly tailored, sunglasses catching the light, that slight smile that could mean anything or nothing. Prince sat at the piano with the fluid grace that had always characterized his movements, despite what it cost his body. The audience settled into their seats, the kind of electric silence that precedes something magical. He began to play, the opening notes of a song that everyone recognized but had never heard like this before, stripped down to its essential components. Reimagined through the lens of pure musical genius. His fingers moved across the keys with the precision of someone who had mastered a dozen instruments and understood music at a level that professional composers envied. For the next 2 hours, Prince delivered a performance those present would describe as otherworldly. He moved through his catalog with ease, playing hits and deep cuts. He talked between songs, his voice soft but enigmatic. He sat at that piano and reminded everyone why Rolling Stone had ranked him among the greatest artists of all time. Why his influence could be heard in everyone from Beyoncé to Bruno Mars. Why his death would eventually shake the entire music world to its core. But something was different. People noticed it without quite understanding what they were noticing. There were moments between songs where Prince seemed to gather himself, where the smile slipped just slightly, where his breathing seemed labored in a way that didn't match the physical demands of sitting at a piano. Some in the audience wondered if he was still recovering from the flu. Others thought maybe he was just tired from touring. A few noticed that he seemed to hold on to the piano bench in an odd way when standing up to acknowledge applause, as if he needed the support. Halfway through the performance, Prince played Purple Rain. People swayed with their phone lights raised. His voice cracked on certain notes, but it made the performance more powerful, more human. When the song ended, he sat at the piano for a long moment, head bowed. Some claimed they saw him wipe his eyes. Then the next song came, and the performance continued. The show ended just after midnight. Prince took his final bow, waved to the audience, and disappeared off stage as the crowd erupted in a standing ovation that seemed to shake the historic theater's foundations. People filed out into the Atlanta night, still buzzing with the energy of what they'd witnessed, sharing favorite moments, recording instant reactions on their phones, having no idea they'd just seen history's final chapter. Behind the scenes, Prince's team moved with practiced efficiency, breaking down the minimal equipment, preparing for departure. Prince himself retreated to his dressing room, and those who saw him noted that he looked drained in a way that went beyond normal post-performance exhaustion. But he'd given everything on that stage. That was how Prince always performed. Total commitment, complete immersion, whatever it cost. The flight back to Minneapolis was scheduled to leave a few hours later. Prince preferred traveling at night when airports were quieter, when he could move through terminals with slightly less commotion. Though even at 3 a.m. people recognized him and wanted pictures, autographs, a moment of connection with genius. The private jet took off in the pre-dawn hours of April 15th with Prince and his small entourage aboard. Somewhere over Illinois, as the plane cruised at 45,000 feet and most of the passengers dozed in the cabin's dim lighting, everything changed. Prince went to the bathroom and didn't come back. Minutes passed, then more minutes. One of his team members knocked on the door. No response. Knocked harder. Nothing. They forced the door open and found him collapsed on the floor, unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular, his skin tone wrong in a way that immediately triggered panic. The pilot was informed. Emergency protocols were initiated. The nearest airport was Moline, Illinois, a small regional facility that wasn't equipped for this kind of crisis. But there was no choice. The plane began its descent, dropping 45,000 feet in 17 minutes, a rate of descent that passengers later described as terrifying. Prince's team worked desperately to keep him breathing, to keep him conscious, to keep him alive until the plane could land and real medical help could arrive. The plane touched down at Quad City International Airport at 1:17 a.m. local time. Paramedics were already waiting on the tarmac, ambulances with lights flashing in the darkness. They rushed aboard and found Prince barely responsive. His vital signs were critical. His pupils were pinpoint tiny. Every indicator pointed to the same diagnosis: opioid overdose. They administered Narcan, the emergency medication that reverses opioid effects, directly into his system. The response was almost immediate. Prince's breathing stabilized. His consciousness returned. Color came back to his face. He'd been pulled back from the edge of death by a medication that saved thousands of lives in America's ongoing opioid crisis. The paramedics wanted to transport him to the hospital immediately. Protocol demanded it. Someone who just had a Narcan reversed overdose needed medical monitoring, toxicology screens, evaluation for the underlying issues that had caused the crisis. But Prince refused. He was conscious, legally capable of making his own decisions, and he absolutely refused to go to the hospital. His team supported his decision, though some later questioned whether they should have. After 3 hours of medical observation on the tarmac, with Prince insisting he was fine and just wanted to go home, the plane was cleared to continue to Minneapolis. At 6 a.m. on April 15th, Prince arrived at Paisley Park. He'd been dead or near dead less than 5 hours earlier, saved only by emergency medical intervention. And somehow, he still convinced himself and everyone around him that everything would be okay. Between April 15th and April 21st, Prince lived in a strange state of denial and preparation that the people around him couldn't quite parse. He appeared in public on April 16th, showing up at a Paisley Park dance party he'd organized, a PR move designed to show the world he was fine after rumors of the emergency landing had started circulating. He stood on a small stage and told the crowd, "Wait a few days before you waste any prayers." It was meant to be reassuring. It was actually chilling in retrospect. He showed people his new guitar. He smiled for pictures. He seemed tired but present, and everyone wanted to believe he was okay, because the alternative was unthinkable. Behind the scenes, though, things were falling apart. Prince's team had finally grasped the severity of his addiction and had reached out to Dr. Howard Kornfeld, a California-based addiction specialist who ran a treatment facility. Kornfeld couldn't fly to Minnesota immediately, but sent his son Andrew, who carried buprenorphine, a medication used to treat opioid addiction, with the plan to stabilize Prince and then get him into proper treatment. It was a desperate measure by people who had run out of options. April 20th was Prince's last full day alive. He was seen at a local Walgreens picking up prescriptions. Witnesses said he looked frail, smaller somehow than his already slight frame should have allowed. He went to Paisley Park and spent time in the studio, in the vault, surrounded by the music that had been his entire life. What he did there, what he listened to, what he was thinking, nobody knows. He was alone with his art and his demons. The same combination that had fueled 5 decades of genius and had now brought him to the edge of oblivion. That night, he was alone at Paisley Park, or nearly alone. His staff had gone home. The sprawling complex that usually hummed with activity was silent. Somewhere in those hours, Prince took what he thought were Vicodin pills. They weren't. They were counterfeit pills pressed to look like Vicodin, but actually containing fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times more powerful than heroin. Even tiny miscalculations in dosage can be fatal. Prince took the pills, probably seeking relief from the constant pain that had tortured him for so long, and his body simply couldn't handle what was actually in them. His breathing slowed, his heart rate dropped, his brain was deprived of oxygen, and alone in Paisley Park, in the place he'd built as a temple to his creativity, Prince died. April 21st, 2016. 9:43 a.m. A 911 call came from Paisley Park. The caller, later identified as Andrew Kornfeld, the addiction specialist's son who'd arrived to help Prince begin treatment, reported an unresponsive male at the complex. The dispatcher asked questions. The responses became increasingly frantic. CPR was attempted. Paramedics were rushing to the scene. But when first responders arrived and made their way to the elevator on the first floor, they found Prince lying on the floor. And it was immediately clear that no intervention would help. He'd been dead for hours, his body already in rigor mortis. The medical examiner later determined he'd likely died around 4 a.m., alone in the elevator between floors, perhaps trying to get help or simply collapsing there by cruel chance. The toxicology report would eventually reveal fentanyl concentrations in his blood that were 67.8 micrograms per liter, a level that the medical examiner classified as exceedingly high, and more than enough to cause death. The pills found at the scene and in Prince's possession were sent to the DEA for analysis. Many of them contained fentanyl but were labeled as hydrocodone or other medications. Prince had been taking what he thought were prescription painkillers, not knowing he was actually ingesting one of the most dangerous drugs in existence. The news broke within hours. Prince dead at 57. The announcement sent shockwaves through the music world and beyond. Minneapolis, his hometown, went into collective mourning. Paisley Park was immediately surrounded by grieving fans leaving flowers, purple balloons, handwritten notes, and playing his music from portable speakers. The iconic purple lighting at venues across America and around the world was how cities paid tribute. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame turned purple. Madison Square Garden glowed purple. Even Niagara Falls was lit in purple. Social media exploded with tributes from fellow artists. President Obama released a statement calling Prince one of the most gifted and prolific musicians of our time. The music industry had lost many legends over the years, but Prince's death felt different. Partly because of his age, he should have had decades left, and partly because of how it happened. This wasn't a car accident or a sudden illness. This was America's opioid epidemic, claiming one of its most famous victims. The investigation into his death revealed the same patterns seen in thousands of overdose cases across the country. Legitimate pain, legitimate prescriptions, growing tolerance, increasing desperation, and eventually contact with a black market drug supply contaminated with fentanyl. Prince's story was unique in its details, but tragically common in its arc. Looking back at that final performance at Atlanta's Fox Theater, everything takes on different meaning. The way Prince lingered over certain songs, the emotional weight in his voice during Purple Rain, the moments where he seemed to be gathering his strength between numbers. The audience witnessed a man giving everything he had left while his body was already failing. 24 hours later, he'd be unconscious on a plane. 7 days later, he'd be dead. But on April 14th, he was still Prince. Still brilliant. Still the artist who'd changed music history and influenced generations. That performance, captured in the memories of 5,000 people and the recordings that circulate among collectors, represents both an ending and a kind of immortality. The music didn't die when Prince died. It couldn't. Genius of that magnitude doesn't just disappear. The opioid crisis that killed Prince has only worsened in the years since his death. Fentanyl-contaminated pills have flooded the black market, killing thousands who, like Prince, thought they were taking something else entirely. His death brought attention to the issue, sparked conversations about pain management and addiction treatment. But it hasn't stopped the epidemic. Every day, people die the same way Prince died, taking pills they don't know are poison, seeking relief from pain or escape from reality, and finding death instead. The tragedy of Prince's final performance is that it didn't have to be his final performance. With proper treatment for his addiction, with honest conversations about what he was struggling with a healthcare system better equipped to deal with chronic pain without creating addicts, Prince might have had 20 more years of creating music, 20 more years of performances, 20 more years of genius. Instead, we have April 14th, 2016, and the bittersweet knowledge that we were watching a master at work, not knowing we'd never see him work again. The investigation into Prince's death eventually closed without criminal charges. The source of the fentanyl-laced pills was never definitively determined. Paisley Park became a museum, open to the public so fans could walk the halls where Prince created, see the studios where he recorded, stand in the spaces where genius once lived. The vault remains, though the full extent of its contents is still being cataloged and slowly released to a world hungry for more Prince music. Every posthumous release is bittersweet. New material from an artist who left us far too soon, whose creative output was so prodigious that he left behind enough music for albums to be released for years, maybe decades. And sometimes, late at night, fans return to recordings of that final tour, listening for clues, for meaning, for some understanding of what was happening in those last performances. The piano and a microphone tour was supposed to continue after Atlanta. There were more cities scheduled, more intimate performances planned. But April 14th was the end, though nobody knew it yet. The final notes played, the final applause received, the final bow taken, and then silence. The kind of silence that follows when something irreplaceable is lost. Prince died the way too many artists have died. Brilliant and broken, celebrated and alone. Their genius acknowledged by millions while their personal pain remained invisible until it killed them. His story is a warning about the cost of art created through suffering, about the dangers of self-medication and secret addictions, about how fame and talent don't protect anyone from the things that kill ordinary people every day. But his story is also a testament to what one person can create in a single lifetime, to the power of music to transcend time and mortality, to the way true artistry becomes immortal even when the artist doesn't. April 14th, 2016, was the last time the world got to experience Prince live, in person, creating magic in real time. 7 days later, the world would learn to experience him only through recordings, memories, and the massive cultural legacy he left behind. The performance nobody knew was the last performance. The goodbye nobody realized was goodbye. The end of an era that arrived without warning. That's the tragedy of April 14th. That's the story of Prince's final bow.